Story 1. When scrolling to add my year of birth on a website, I feel like I am spinning the big wheel on the wheel of fortune. Story 2. I turned 40 this year. I do not feel old. Some days I forget how old I am. However, I stopped listening to new music around 2015, and that is how I know I crossed the Rubicon into middle age. Story 3. When I was screening for a new roommate, one person who was interested in the apartment asked how old I was. I was in my 30s at the time. I told them, and then they said, "I love 1980s music." This was in the 2000s. A second time was when I had finally gotten a Rolodex at work to organize all the business cards I had collected. A new employee who had just started work out of college saw it and said, "Hey, I've seen those in movies." A third time was when I read that The Wire, which was on my to-see list, was celebrating its 20th anniversary. In my mind, it had just recently come out. The Wire ran from 2002 to 2008. I still have not seen it yet. A fourth time was when I was at the airport going through a Transportation Security Administration checkpoint, and the agent was scrutinizing my identification. I waited patiently, and finally he asked, "Is this you?" "Yes," I answered, thinking, "Who else would it be?" He handed back my identification and said, "I thought you were this person's father." Story 4. When things hurt not for physical exercise reasons but for other reasons. I didn't take my glucosamine. I must have slept weirdly. I didn't stretch. I didn't drink enough water. Story 5. I'm in my 50s, so I have a long list. When my oldest started school. When my youngest finished school. When my youngest graduated with a master's degree. When my oldest turned 20, and again when he turned 30. When I had my first hot flash. When I had to buy a weekly pill organizer. When my pension statement said I would be eligible to draw on my pension in 2026. When my grandson moved from the infant classes to the junior classes at primary school. When I was prescribed a medication that is never given to women of childbearing age. There is more, but now I am slumped over considering my own mortality. Thank you, Reddit. Story 6. When college-aged adults began making childhood nostalgia posts and videos with entries about Minecraft, phone applications, and YouTube channels. Story 7. The number of times I get acid reflux, indigestion, or heartburn is almost constant. To be fair, I smoke, which I obviously should not. Story 8. When I got excited about getting a new shed or when I had a full conversation with my father about lawnmowers. Story 9. Woke up with my first real wrinkle. I've avoided them for decades with a perfect skincare routine and barely moving my face. It appeared out of nowhere overnight. Not even a nice crow's feet or forehead wrinkle. It's around my lip like a dodgy movie character's scar. Story 10. Almost fell in the shower once, and my first thought was, "Ah shoot, I'm about to need a life alert." Story 11. When I have to suit up like a discounted Iron Man for sleep, I better get my wrist braces, elbow braces, mouth guard, extra arm, and knee pillow. I don't need a continuous positive airway pressure machine, but I imagine if I did, I would either make horrid Call Jarvis jokes or do the Bane Batman dialogue. If you need pain support for a normal 7 to 10 hours of sleep that used to be restful, this isn't for my chronic illness patients who deal with pain daily at any age. Because you're just starting to lose sleep due to joint pain, then you are getting there. Also, for those who have or had a uterus, an increase in trouble falling asleep and staying asleep and/or joint pain and shoulder pain is one of the more than 100 symptoms of perimenopause or menopause that nobody's mother or grandmother warned us about. So if you are in your 30s or 40s starting to wonder what is up with your body, you might want to take a peek there too. Be aware. Many doctors still don't know much about menopause and will repeat some tired phrases. Now, young one, where is the ribbon candy? Story 12. 2 things. When I could not sleep through the night anymore without getting up to urinate, and when I stopped having morning erections. Story 13. The thought of being up in the club repulses me. Music is too loud. Queue for the bar, dirty toilets, and so on. The thought of going to the garden center excites me. Maybe I will get myself a new glazed planter or even a novelty-shaped terracotta pot. I will see if they have any nice patterns of trailing petunias to put in the planter and fiddle with the big barbecues. Story 14. When drinking started to feel like a chore instead of a fun time. Not that I have forcefully made myself drunk, but I have simply lost interest in strong alcohol. Story 15. The weather felt a specific way recently, and it sent me back to some very fond memories. When I snapped back to the present, I realized that was almost half my lifetime ago. Story 16. I am a sailboat captain. I made a joke with my passengers. I do not know much about sailing, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. There was silence from my entire crew. Story 17. First time? 35 years ago when the back trouble started. I have always been physically active. When I was 36 years old, I was canoeing aggressively, something I did regularly. I did this for a couple of minutes and injured my back after some hard strokes. With the paddle, it was debilitating. I could barely support myself in the canoe. There was a lot of pain. Ever since then, my back has been sensitive. When I overdo it, I often do not even realize it at the time. Then, it is hard to walk around without pain for 2 to 3 days. Story 18. When I started trying to conceive, I was informed by my gynecologist that I would be considered a high-risk pregnancy because I will be 39 in September. Story 19. My younger sister has 3 children. The oldest is almost 4 years old. Being an aunt makes you realize that you are not a child anymore and your parents are now grandparents. Story 20. When I moved countries at 10 years of age, it has been 3 years since, and life is starting to get real now. Goodbye, childhood. Story 21. Those few gray hairs are starting to show. Also, poorer eyesight. Aging is difficult, but it is better than the alternative. Story 22. Turned 50 thinking age was just a number. Then it hit me. I am getting older. Now, everyone at 49 tells me age is just a number. Okay. Story 23. When time started to pass so quickly that when thinking about when something happened, you thought, it was last year or the year before. But the correct answer was 7 years ago. Story 24. A friend works as a bouncer and identification check at a club and said it was nice after the pandemic because he does not have to look hard for individuals who are 21 or older anymore. If they were born in 19-something, they are at least 21. Story 25. When MTV canceled Headbangers Ball, it was the first sign that popular culture was moving on without me. Story 26. This happened the other day to my partner. We stopped at a bar on the way home. His identification has expired and he is waiting for the new one to arrive. But he usually does not get asked for identification anyway as we are both in our mid-30s. The woman at the door scans the identification and it shows expired. He says he is waiting for the new one, and she shrugs and says, "It is okay, you are old enough," and lets us in. Story 27. Ages 21 to 23 were good. At 24, things started to change, and by 25, it began to go downhill. Sleeping wrong, neck hurts for 3 days. Want to go out drinking? Better prehydrate and have your post-drinking ritual ready to go, or you will feel hungover for 3 days. You need to start stretching before the gym. You have to eat right or you will feel it. Story 28. When my favorite sports icons were younger than I was, it was even more impactful when those same men and women started retiring. Story 29. When it became harder to lose body fat, I really had to start eating healthier and could not eat whatever I wanted without gaining weight. Story 30. No one under 30 understands my movie references. What do you mean you have never seen Tommy Boy? What a shame. Story 31. When 50% of the people you went to school with are buying homes, getting married, or having children, or already have 2 to 3 children. We are in our mid-20s. Story 32. When I realized that I need to start making stretching and mobility exercises a normal routine. I am only 40. Story 33. I knew it was going to start at 33 years old, now 38 years old, when my stepdad, then 63, died and it became just me with my elderly mom, now 79. I knew she was my sole responsibility. Then, maybe 3 years later, I could feel our dynamics shifting. I was becoming the mom and she, the stubborn daughter. It is easier now, but at the time I was having a crisis. I was really growing up and realizing the gravity of my situation. Realizing she is not getting any younger and her mind is losing its sharpness. Story 34. When talking to my best friend and asking him how old his oldest son was, he said he is turning 15 this year. Can you imagine how that feels? I saw that kid when he was a baby, and now he is turning 15 years old. That hit harder than expected. Story 35. At 23, I thought I had peaked at 19 and nothing was ever going to get better. I felt old and washed up. 3 years later, I cycled from Land's End to John O'Groats after crossing France on the same bike in 3 days. A few months later, I met the girl who later became my wife. 30, I felt I had peaked and that was it, all downhill from then on. 32, I became a father and bought a house. At 35, I became a father again. It has been one of those lives where, just when you think all the good times have been had and there's nothing to look forward to, something else comes along. I think if you accept the woe is me, I'm old and done attitude, you probably will be. You have to stay playful, stay curious, and remember, it's not over until it's over. Story 36. I used to play basketball every day during my college years. I am now 27 years old and sometimes I can barely walk. My body hurts significantly after just 1 to 2 hours of playing. I should really take a break, but I am struggling to accept that maybe I cannot handle it anymore. Story 37. After a bad accident, I figured I would be fine after recovery, but now I have persistent aches. It was a serious accident that could have been fatal. I was 29 and believed that after doing physical therapy, I would be back to normal within a year. My hips click when I stand up or turn my body. When I do yard work, that is it for the day. My hips become too sore to do more physical activity afterward. Story 38. Sometimes there is no morning erection. I thought to myself, okay, yes, I am getting old. 15 years ago, I decided to join the army. I walked into the recruiting office. The first thing the soldier gave me was a pamphlet to give to my son. Story 39. When I overheard younger people's conversations and problems, I realized that I had those problems 15 years ago. Story 40. Turning 13, turning 16, turning 18, turning 21, turning 25, and turning 30. I became acutely aware through my teenage years how much my body was changing and how we are always getting older. What makes it feel official to me are the more milestone birthdays. Story 41. When I started getting annoyed at applications and websites that make it difficult to scroll back and find your year of birth. Story 42. I started a project where I took old home videos and converted them to digital. What really struck me was watching videos of my parents having children, buying a house, and traveling when they were younger than me. For the first time in my life, I truly saw my parents as young. It made me rethink my own age. While I am still relatively young, I am now an adult and need to start living that way. Story 43. When your younger siblings or cousins say they are not going to draft a player in fantasy football because they are old as hell, but the player is 2 years younger than you currently are. Story 44. I realized that I was old once the employees at the submarine sandwich place next to the university stopped calling me brother and started calling me sir. Story 45. It was really when I started to not game as much. I realized I would rather be doing activity-based content instead of sitting and playing some game. I still enjoy it, but I would rather be doing things. Story 46. Like someone else said, the scrolling for your birth year feels like you're playing Wheel of Fortune. Around the same time as that realization, a couple of gray hairs returned, and I noticed the lines under my eyes. Those lines have always been there when I'm making expressions, but now they are still visible in the morning mirror. People say it's a privilege to get old. They are right, but it is still a reminder that I am farther from childhood, inching closer to the eventual deaths of my loved ones. One day I will be in a bed alone, and not by choice. That is scary. Story 47. I was chatting with a female coworker about dating. I casually said, "Why don't you ask out XXX? I think he's single." She replied, "Gross, he's like XX years old," and mentioned my age. Story 48. When my knee started to hurt and once when I was climbing a bridge I tripped and fell. I no longer had the same ability to avoid falling. Story 49. When a song from the 90s came on, I said to my apprentice, "This is a great song." His answer was, "Yeah, I heard this song before. My dad used to listen to this old stuff." Story 50. After a barbecue, A friend mentioned indigestion. More than half the group simultaneously pulled out antacids. Then we started rating the different brands. Not too long ago, eating gas station burritos after a night out had zero impact on our gut health. Story 51. When I told my children to lower the television, the volume was already very low. At that point, I remembered how the adults would always tell us children to lower the television, even though the volume was very low. I have become one of them. I also find myself talking about the weather or a new pain in my body that I woke up with that day. Story 52. When I went to the emergency room for possible appendicitis, the physician assistant who saw me said, "You probably will never find the cause of the pain, so next time just wait until the pain is so bad that you are vomiting before coming in." Story 53. There was a 30-inch wide by 30-inch deep communications trench dug on a property. I casually approached while talking to someone nearby and half-heartedly attempted to hop over to the other side. My front foot barely caught the edge, and with all my momentum now going backward into the ditch, I had no option but to fully leap back in the direction I came from. However, I did not have enough power to clear it going the other way either. My foot hit short on that edge, and I slid down the side into the shallow trench. I landed on the PVC pipes laying there, rolled my ankle a little, and my boots filled with dirt. I was very embarrassed. I couldn't believe that at the age of 40 I can't even jump a less than 3-foot trench without a running start. When I was 14, I used to climb 8-foot chain link fences, balance at the top to carefully navigate the barbed wire without getting shoelaces caught, and then jump straight down onto hard pavement. My knees hurt just thinking about landing like that now in my 40s. Story 54. When I paid off my student debt and started saving for a house. When actually buying a house. When a fall I would normally bounce back from means 6 months of physical therapy. I am 32. Story 55. I never thought I would live to 60, so that was quite a turning point for me. I gave up mascara and hair dye and stopped lying about my age. I earned these years, damn it. Senior citizens rock. Story 56. I took a video of myself petting my chubby cat to send to my mother. When I was watching the video, I stared at my hand and thought, whose hand is that? Story 57. When I started hearing more ma'am or senora than miss or senorita, especially when I wasn't with anyone else, this line was crossed somewhere around 35 to 36 years old in the United States and around 25 to 30 in more conservative, rural parts of Mexico. I was almost always called senora in Guatemala at 22, and I am still called miss in the United Kingdom at 38, even when my husband is standing next to me. Story 58. I hurt myself doing daily chores and simple tasks like bending over to empty the dishwasher or turning my neck too fast. Story 59. Turning 50 took me about 2 years to get over, especially after my first grandchild was born. That's when it really sank in. Story 60. Watching sports and draft classes full of people who were not even born when I graduated from college. Story 61. I stopped wanting to look up people from high school because the likelihood of finding obituaries increased. Story 62. When I realized partying without an actual reason to celebrate is a complete waste of time. Partying for something as vague as celebrating life, unless it is about being free of an illness like cancer, turning another year older, unless it is a milestone like 21, 30, or 40, or finishing one semester of college, is not a reason in my mind to get wasted. Story 63. When I started managing a staff of college students in my late 30s, I noticed they had not seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy or the original Star Wars trilogy. They had not played the same video games I did, or they experienced them as young children while I was playing them in my 20s. They used a completely different language. They texted in emojis. They did not understand the pop culture references I made. When I was a server in my late 20s and early 30s, there was always a wide range of ages on staff, and I did not feel very different from the youngest servers. Becoming a manager of a staff made up exclusively of college-age students from a different generation made me realize I am getting older and less relevant. Story 64. I'm 24, not all that old, but I feel like I'm getting old. I've been an old soul forever. This was back in the 2022 Texas governor election, so I had only been an adult for a very short while. I knew I was truly an adult when Beto O'Rourke came to my school, and my first thought was, parking is going to be a nightmare. Thankfully, it wasn't. When I got home, I was informed that I was truly an adult. Story 65. My reaction time when playing online games like Marvel Rivals, Battlefield 6, Call of Duty, and others is slow. I just can't keep up with these kids. Story 66. Climbing just a few stairs and already out of breath. That's when it hit me. I am not as young as I used to be. Story 67. Last year I was at a concert. I was sitting on the ground waiting for it to start because I arrived early. When it was time for me to get up, I put my weight on my right leg and pushed my body up, but there was nothing to hold on to. Instead of supporting me, my leg trembled and collapsed under the weight. I did not get hurt. I actually managed to get back up right after. The entire incident lasted only a couple of seconds, and nobody even noticed. However, for the first time in my life, I felt old. I am 31. Story 68. I was driving my convertible and exited a roundabout without using my indicator. I heard someone yell, "Use your indicator, you old man." Story 69. I have always been an athlete. In your early to mid-30s, performance starts to decline. You realize that you have to train even harder just to slow the decline. Story 70. When my newer coworkers asked me to go out to the new trendy bar, I physically felt the no thanks as I said it. I can have a glass at my house and be in bed by 10:30. Story 71. When I stopped truly loving or getting excited about music and songs, I started listening to techno and trance. Story 72. I'd say my mid to late 20s. I started my midlife crisis right at 30 to get it out of the way. Sadly, I am still going through that crisis. Time is the fire in which you burn. I think of that every day, and sadly, I can feel the burning. I even feel it for others, especially friends and family. Story 73. When I get excited going to grocery stores to find a good deal on meat, vegetables, and fruits instead of snacks and drinks. Also, when I realize that my life is filled with many chores and errands. Story 74. When I started getting into passionate discussions about the sense of entitlement among young people today. Look in the mirror one day and notice a difference in your hairline. That change really sneaks up on you. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.